Thank you everyone for joining us here today. This webinar is being recorded. It is the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for Fostering Connection, addressing library employee loneliness. I go over a few items before we get into our guest speaker. First, how to use Zoom, just a few technical things. We do have a live closed captioner for today's webinar. Closed captioning has been enabled and it's available by clicking on the icon with the 3 dots and then selecting closed caption. All attendees have been muted, but we do welcome your questions and comments at the chat at any time. Please be sure to select everyone from the drop-down menu when posting your questions and comments in chat so everyone can see them. And if you've joined us since I initially asked, go ahead and drop in chat where you're joining us from today to test that function out. If you do have questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A function to post them. We're going to queue them up as they come in and save them to ask our speaker at the end of the session. If you need technical support during the webinar, please use the Q&A function for that as well. Sometimes those comments and questions do get lost in chat if we have a very active chat. We are recording today's session and we will post it on the NNLM YouTube channel in about a week. At that time, everyone who registered for this session will receive an email with a link from us for the recording and a link to claiming their CE for this class. As a reminder, by registering for this webinar, all attendees have agreed to abide by the NNLM Code of Conduct to foster a respectful and professional learning environment. This class is eligible for 1 continuing education credit from the Medical Library Association, which you'll be able to claim through the evaluation link and enrollment code that we'll share with you at the end of this session. Just as a heads up, we do not have that code as of yet. So if you're a person who likes to claim that right at the end, unfortunately, you are going to have to wait for the email to come out. We'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Even if you're not interested in claiming CE from MLA, your feedback does matter to us. Please take some time to take the evaluation at the end of the webinar. A quick background on who we are. The National Library of Medicine is one of the 27 institutes and offices of the National Institutes of Health. It is the world's largest biomedical library and produces online resources such as PubMed and MedlinePlus. NNLM, or the Network of the National Library of Medicine, is an outreach program of NLM, and it works to ensure health professionals and the public have equal access to health information. NNLM is made up of 7 regional medical libraries, 3 national offices, 4 national centers, all providing training, funding, and engagement opportunities to our member organizations. Today's session was organized by Region 6 as part of our Spotlight Speaker webinar series. I am Bobby Newman, your host for today. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Community Engagement and Outreach Specialist for Region 6 at the University of Iowa Libraries. My colleague, Miles Dietz-Castell, him, is the the Communications Specialist and is here with me today. And we'll both be keeping an eye on chat and gather your questions to share with Alejandro at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to introduce our speaker. So today with us, we have Alejandro Marquez, him. He is a Science and Engineering Librarian at the University of Denver Libraries. He also served in the Peace Corps in El Salvador, where he worked as a Municipal Development volunteer. His research interests include library employee engagement and mental health. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and hand it over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alejandro, and today's session is called Fostering Connection, Adjusting Library Employee Loneliness. I just want to start off right here by saying that the content we're going to be discussing might be heavy for some of you. We're going to be looking at job satisfaction, low morale, constructive criticism, negative workplace culture. So take a moment of self-care if you need to. This presentation is going to be recorded, so you can always come back. I put my contact information on the screen if you want to reach out and talk about the topic or if you want to connect. I'm always happy to meet new people. So some of the objectives for today, we're going to do some interactive activities. So we're going to be using the chat function over here. So if you haven't pulled it out yet, go ahead and do that right now. We're going to bring awareness to the phenomenon of employee loneliness in the library. And what I really want people to feel is that they're not the only one that feels this way. There's a reason. And now you have keywords to use in your database literature search. And at the end, I also want to talk about the next steps in this journey. And I really do believe it's a journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be something that's going to be happening over a long period of time. So I want to start off with a little bit of a story. I think it's hard for me to admit that I've been lonely in my library career. And I think the loneliest I felt was when I took a job out of state and it rolled around to be about Thanksgiving time. And usually on most college campuses, someone invites you home for Thanksgiving. And this year, nobody invited me home for Thanksgiving. And so it was really difficult. And I think the hardest part was when my boss recommended that I visit the local church in the city center in order to have Thanksgiving with them. And I just want to say that these were all good people, but who had just had no idea about, others and other people's circumstances. And I think in a lot of ways, this distance from the situation creates physical and emotional barriers. We're not thinking about poor working conditions, microaggressions, pay inequality. And being at the top of the org chart for a lot of people creates this distance from workplace realities. And so for me, when I think about this topic of loneliness, I really think about all the different dimensions of it. So for me, loneliness is a race, class, gender, age, ability, and sexuality issue. We're bringing all these different identities into this environment. So for our first activity in the chat box, post one way that libraries can promote employee belonging. Again, in the chat box, post one way that libraries can promote employee belonging. Okay, so I've seen some answers come in. Potlucks, movie nights, open door policy, inclusivity, affinity groups, birthday recognition, all staff meetings, have parties, a chili feed, which sounds wonderful, pet pictures, open houses, simply greeting each other, lunch, name tags with fun facts, recognition awards, sharing a meal, learn each other's names, I think is really important. A walking group, which I think is great. I'm gonna give it about another 15 seconds here. Sharing information about your position, I think is great. Birthday parties for everyone. Book clubs. Meaningful icebreaker questions at meetings. Sharing your library story. Mandatory individual meetings, I think, is a great option for connecting with other people. So now that we've kind of talked about ways to promote belonging, I also want to look at some of the trends that are happening. So I want to look at some of the experience and realities that are happening. And I specifically chose all of these trends because they connect to loneliness, which we'll look at much more in the next section. But again, all these trends have a direct relationship with loneliness. So this question asks, this is a survey from Library Journal. It says, please identify your number one dissatisfaction. And so you can see on the screen here, we have low salary, not enough staff, conflicts with administrators, inadequate budget, lack of recognition or respect, performing non-library related tasks. And in this question, also from Library Journal, the question asks, how satisfied are you with your current job? And so this is a comparison between 2022 and 2012. And you can see here in the middle, academic libraries are the least satisfied at 50%, public libraries at 59%, and school libraries at 62%. And this question, also from Library Journal, asks, would you choose this career again? And you can see here in the middle, academic libraries are the least satisfied out of any of the groups, and 32% say no. And so I think looking at all these first 4 slides, there is a lot of overlap between some of those responses. So this slide is from McKinsey and Company, and they asked for the top reasons for resignation. And there are a lot of the same things that we've been looking at in these last couple slides too, from the lack of career development and advancement, inadequate compensation, uncaring and uninspiring leaders, lack of meaningful work, unsustainable work expectations, unsupportive people at work, that lack of flexibility. And I think this really dovetailed really nicely into the work that Katrina Davis Kendrick has been doing. She's been studying low morale. So she's looked at academic librarians, public librarians, BIPOC librarians, and she found that for people to have low morale, there's often a lack of respect, a lack of recognition, poor work-life balance, poor leadership or communication, and then structural issues. And so I think for a lot of people, they're often feeling pushed out rather than pulled towards a better opportunity. So they're leaving not because they want to, or they feel like they're going towards something. They're really feeling like they're being pushed out the door. People are feeling disrespected, that their work isn't valued, or they don't feel seen. And I think it really highlights this need for individuals and organizations to be more proactive in career development. It's a retention issue at the bottom, at the end of the day, for managers, and it's a job satisfaction for workplace employees. And so for me, the key takeaway from looking at these slides is that for individuals who are wanting to quit, people can be passionate about learning in books and service, but you don't have to remain in a poor, toxic environment or librarianship. I also looked at the urban library trauma study. I have a link right there at the bottom. Fascinating read if you haven't seen it before. And some of the statistics here are really surprising. 68.5% have experienced violent or aggressive behavior from patrons. 85% have experienced trauma in the workplace and shared it with others. And 83% have received support from another member of staff. And so the trend I'm seeing is that workers often feel that they're not trained or qualified to assist. We're not social workers, we're not accountants, we're not mental health professionals. And I think a lot of people feel really conflicted about their role to help or not to help. And some patrons have needs and stories that are emotionally draining and time consuming. How many of us have heard a 5-minute story and then thought about that person, not only for hours, but days, and sometimes even weeks and months afterwards? We're wondering if this person is physically safe, emotionally safe. Did their problem resolve itself? I also think that a lot of people are dealing with safety concerns due to patron behaviors. A lot of our patrons are experiencing homelessness, mental distress, the opioid crisis. And for some people, calling the police or campus safety or emergency assistance is a reality. I also looked at Fabazi Atar, and she coined the term vocational awe. And she found that libraries are often thought of as inherently good and sacred, and therefore beyond critique. And it's really hard to offer critique or even positive criticism of an organization when it's inherently good and sacred. And people who often challenge this institutional power often face marginalization, dismissal, or retaliation as a result. I'm also finding that a lot of people seem like they're languishing. So languishing is this absence of diagnosable mental health conditions. And it was coined by the sociologist Corey Keyes. And so it's this feeling of being stuck, or that life has become stagnant, feelings of emptiness or lack of motivation, and also thinking about the future. And I think it also, people are also experiencing demoralization. So these policies and practices that hinder workers from upholding their core values. And it's this lack of meaningful change leads to feelings of frustration or disengagement. People are also feeling disconnected from their passion. And that passion was, I think, for a lot of us, what initially drove us into the profession. We want to be of service. We want to help other people. We love books. And it's kind of difficult in today's politically charged climate to really do all of that. I'm also finding that a lot of people are experiencing a good deal of grief. And so grief is this conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And so I think for a lot of us, especially during and after this post-COVID time, if we're in that post-COVID time, we saw a lot of friends and mentors leave organizations, oftentimes through the Great Resignation, but also during COVID, people literally died and they left, and there's a hole in the organization. There's also been this reorganization or layoffs that people have experienced. I know in the last 12 years that I've been working as a librarian, I've gone through 4 reorgs four reorgs. I think people are also searching for passion or meaning in their work. There often feels like there's lack of collaboration or camaraderie. Maybe it's because or a good portion of us are working from home some days a week. People are looking like they're dwelling on the past or having apprehension of the future. I also think that there's a little bit of anger also present in our library systems. And I think that anger is this basic human emotion, and it's experienced by all people. And I think that workers are really pushing back against these resilience narratives, understaffing and lack of pay. And at its most positive, I think anger can be a catalyst for really identifying and addressing the underlying issues. And so for a lot of us, our jobs often provide more than a paycheck. They often offer a sense of purpose, growth, and community. So for our next chat box activity, in a few words, post to your chat box, what is your definition of loneliness? Again, in the chat box, in a few words, what is your definition of loneliness? So I'm seeing a lack of connection, isolation, isolated disconnection, being in a room full of people, not feeling heard or seen, lack of companionship or communication, cut off from a community, no support system, afraid to be vulnerable, isolated, not valued, feeling forgotten. I love this one, lost phone. I know, I lose my phone and it feels like something's missing. Solo librarianship, no one to talk to. The feeling that no one understands what you're going through in the company of strangers. We'll give it about another 10 seconds here. having a difficult day and no one to share it with, no noise, the revolving door of new employees, lack of deep and meaningful friendships, always being the strong one, management doesn't want to know you. So you might have seen the headline from the US Surgeon General. He wrote that loneliness is just as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so looking at some of the statistics, this one here asks, tell me how often you have felt lonely in the last 12 months. And you can see that always, often, and sometimes is around 50%. 50%. And this question asks, I feel lonely at work. And again, strongly agree, somewhat disagree, somewhat agree, is a little under 50%. And so what we've seen in studies, both national and international, both personal and professional, it's anywhere between about 40 to 70% of people feel just a little bit lonely, and some people feel a lot lonelier than that. So some of the definitions that you alluded to are also here on this screen. This gap between what we desire or want to have and the reality we actually experience. The feeling of isolation or disconnection from colleagues, your work, or even yourself. And this feeling that I'm less connected than I want to be. And so I really want to highlight that last part, than I want to be. So we can be alone, but also lonely. So for me, when I think about loneliness, I'm also thinking about all the different emotions that we might be feeling. So I put a whole bunch of them on the screen, and this is just a good idea to think about. So if you think that you might be feeling some emotions, they could be related to loneliness. So some of them that pop out to me are these idea of sorrow or sadness, feeling helpless or rejected, powerless, lost, empty, distant, inadequate. We could also be disappointed or have outrage. And so if you're wondering, how is loneliness different than burnout or low morale or trauma or depression? So for me, all of these things on the screen here are really about this lack of connection. And if loneliness is also a lack of connection, there's a lot of overlap between these two. And so I think they're very interrelated, and sometimes it can be really hard to distinguish between them, mainly because both of these categories are all about this lack of disconnection. So there's three different types of loneliness. Physical and psychological loneliness is the one that's most often studied. And so sometimes it brings up some questions. And some of the questions that pop up for me are, who's my work friend? Who's someone I can tell my troubles to? Who's got my back? Is there a support system to help me celebrate the wins and navigate the negative aspects? The second one is societal loneliness. And so it's this feeling that we can be lonely even though we're surrounded by people. And so for some of us who work very public-facing roles, we can be in the middle of a crowded floor and still feel lonely. And so some of the questions that might pop up are, do I feel included or excluded? Do I know and feel secure about what is happening? Is my being here welcomed and safe? And I think this last question of feeling welcomed and safe is a real concern for people who are coming from minority groups, either LGBTQ, race or ethnic minorities. They want to know that they're going to be welcomed and physically and emotionally safe. Some of these other questions might also allude to these ideas of, is there talk of layoffs or reorganizations in the building? Are people sharing information? Do I feel included or excluded in those conversations that might be happening? The third category is spiritual and existential loneliness. So it's this feeling like you don't matter or your work doesn't matter. And I know for me, this type of conversation always happens at 2:00. Wake up in the middle of the night and I wonder, what am I doing with my life? And so some of the questions that might pop up for you are, how am I connected to the universe? Does my life or work have meaning? Am I connected to something bigger or am I disposable? And I think that we really create belonging through a shared identity. We really want people who look like us, think like us, act like us, have our similar values. And different groups are going to experience that loneliness differently. So paraprofessionals, contingent library workers who are part-time temporary staff, members of the LGBTQ community. Parents are facing it in a different way than single people. People who are geographically isolated, living in either small or rural towns. Those who are having language barriers. Gender could also be a case. And one group that I want to highlight in particular are paraprofessionals. I really think the term paraprofessionals is bad terminology. The definition is professionals belong to profession while paraprofessionals are trained to assist, lack licensure training. And that's just not how I see paraprofessionals at all. Really the library rock stars of our organizations. They're often about 60% of library staff are paraprofessionals. So they include our cleaning staff, our IT people, the executive secretary, the webmaster, our security staff, people who work the front desk and also behind the scenes, the technical services oftentimes are paraprofessionals. They earn on average, according to Library Journal, about $46,000 a year. The Bureau of Labor Statistics say that librarians make about $62,000, so about a $16,000 difference. They're often not part of the decision-making process, oftentimes. And there can be a lot of role blurring, meaning that they're doing a lot of the same work as librarians without getting paid the same amount of money. There can also be a glass ceiling for paraprofessionals, so they can't progress upwards in their career without that MLIS degree. And there can also be a lot of hierarchy in the building, often that librarian staff divide. And you can also experience loneliness throughout your career. I know when I was a new career librarian, I really didn't feel like my boss really gave me the feedback and training I might have wanted to be successful. And as I progressed through my career and entering my mid-career, I'm really thinking about, where do I want to go from here? Do I want to advance in the organization? Do I want to make a lateral move? And that's also kind of a little bit nerve-wracking too at times. And then for those of us who might be in their late careers, you might be thinking about retirement or leaving a legacy. I know that a lot of late career people often feel that younger people in the workplace don't give them enough credit, don't feel that they're not as committed to EDI issues as maybe the younger generation. And so it's really creating this generational divide. I also think that managers are also feeling lonely through their careers, mainly because they're not staff, not yet administration. They're in this weird middle ground between the two of them. And so they hear things that they can't share, and it's hard to develop relationships with people who you might have to fire later on. I also think that work from home also presents its own unique challenges in terms of loneliness. On the positive side, there's flexibility and convenience, cost savings because you don't have to go in every day. There can also be health and safety concerns. I know for a lot of BIPOC individuals, they really love working from home because they don't have to deal with the office drama nor the microaggressions that they might be facing. And then some of the downsides could be work-life boundaries. How do you separate your work and your life if your life is at your kitchen table? There could also be technology challenges. Sometimes it's hard when things break down because you just can't go down to the hall to the IT desk. There could be limited career advancement opportunities. Oftentimes managers, I think, incorrectly believe that if people who work from home aren't committed to the organization. I think it's also that there's communication barriers too. Sometimes things happen in the building and then an email isn't sent to everybody to tell them what happened. I also think that loneliness could be a part of a dead-end job. So the 5 factors of a dead-end job that I've identified are this little career advancement or professional growth. I know for a lot of people, where they enter into the library is often where they stay. So if they enter into the reference department, they stay a reference librarian. Technical services, they stay in that department. And the only way to advance in their career is often to go into a manager position. And it's really hard to do a lateral move. There's often lack of pay increases, often an absence of autonomy, lack of task variety. And for some people, there could be a negative workplace culture that really does hamper feelings of being positive in the workplace. So for me, exclusion is just really painful. That feeling of exclusion is painful. And so it can have mental health effects. So you may be feeling sadness or anger, decreased self-esteem. And it could also impact your physical health. Again, the U.S. Surgeon General says that loneliness is just as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So for me, belonging is this fundamental need. It's innate and universal. And it's this need and not a want. So everyone needs to have some type of connection. And it could be of their choosing and how they choose to do it, but there needs to be a connection built into the system. So I want to start this next section by looking at some personal examples that are personal to me, kind of talking about why they might be lonely. So this comment reads, I don't want to be that person who goes against the library culture by drawing attention to toxic issues and dynamics. And so I know for me, it feels oftentimes that there's a subset of us that are always wasting our hands and asking, what about workload? What about work-life balance? What about pay inequality or an EDI issue? And it can feel really lonely if you feel like you're the one who's always raising their hand. Or maybe you feel like it's not your place to bring up this issue, whether you're afraid due to the toxic work environment that you might be singled out. And so then you always have to be kind of waiting for it to happen. This comment reads, my boss said that we should only hire people with a lot of experience because we don't have time to train. And so I know for me, when I heard this comment, it's this idea that everyone deserves training, no matter how long you've been in the workplace. Every workplace does things differently, and they're going to need training and feedback. I also think that it gives a bad message to the rest of staff. It basically tells the rest of staff, hey, if you can't make this work, if you can't make everything, if you can't grind, then we don't want you here. We only want people who have experience, who know what they're doing. And through the course of a career, no matter how long you stay there, we always should be learning and teaching and learning new things. This comment reads, my workplace culture tells me that I have to succeed no matter the obstacles, yet we don't have enough staffing or budget to meet that goal. The only alternative is to work out extra hours and ultimately burn out. And this was my experience. Right before COVID, we had a staff of 5 people in our building. And then through COVID, we went down to a staff of 3 and then a staff of 2. And so I tried as hard as possible to keep everything running. And like a lot of you, I think that I really wanted to make sure that our end user, our patrons, were being helped as much as possible. I didn't want to have that disruption of service. And so I grinded, I worked extra hours, and I thought once this is over, then I can take a break. And, it seemed like over time, it just never ended. And so I burned out. This comment comes from when I was at a job interview and I asked the question, what makes people successful? And the answer I got was, at the end of the year, my new hire will be successful if they know where to find the paper clips. And I remember thinking how funny that was, that was like the low bar for inclusion and success in the building, that you knew where the paper clips were. And so I think that, when we talked about what is things we can do to promote belonging, talking about why we're here, meeting other people in the building, I mean, all of these answers were so much better than to know where the paper clips were. This thought reads, my boss tells me to stay in my own lane, to wait my turn. I'm tired of waiting for my boss to quit or retire. People have been waiting 10 years. And so I think for a lot of people, when I started library school, I was told everyone's going to be retiring in the next couple of years. And then it seems like nobody retired. And so it feels like a lot of people feel like they've just been waiting for people to move on. And so it's this idea that I think it goes back to the idea of the generational divide. This younger generation, who's even younger than me, feel that the older people, this older generation hasn't done enough in terms of EDI or pay inequality. And this older generation, I think, is feeling like they've been doing a lot. And so there's this divide in the workplace that we can't seem to get on the same page, even though I really do believe that all of us want the same goal and objective. This thought reads, I got this career advice from a retiring employee. Don't raise your hand and don't expect too much. And I think on the surface, this sounds like really great advice. Don't raise your hand, don't make waves. And then also this idea of like, keep your expectations low. And I think on the other hand, it really bothers me because I think if you're like me, you got into librarianship because you wanted to be passionate about what you do. You wanted to be of service. And so this idea of not raising your hand and not expecting too much just feels like a big letdown. So that was a lot. Why don't we take some breaths? So why don't we breathe in? And so I really want us to take a moment to scan our bodies and see if there's any tension that might be present within it. See if you might have any tension in your shoulders or in your face. So I think if you're like me, you might be having a lot of thoughts and feelings after seeing this part of the presentation. So you might be feeling that there's feelings of sadness, anger, mistrust, or even frustration. You might be thinking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. I know for a lot of people, they're thinking about what is and their managers, administration's roles and responsibilities in solving these problems that we've been talking about today. Some people might not be feeling heard or seen in their workplaces. You might have too many thoughts or even too little feelings. And you might be thinking, well, where do we go from here? And so for our next chat box activity, I really want you to think about and post in the chat box, what future do you want to create? Or what emotion do you want to feel? Again, in the chat box, what future do you want to create or what emotion do you want to feel? I'm seeing inclusion, peace, hope, contentment, empowered, cooperation, joy, happiness. I want to be financially sound and I want to be thriving, not just surviving. Expansive thinking, joy and good health, connected to my work, welcoming and accepted, belonging, impactful, challenge in their work to be interested and connected to the people that they're working with, to be viewed as competent, to feel that I'm useful in making a difference, a collaborator, radical vulnerability, valued and included, more mentoring, safe, so I really think that there is a lot of hope that we have for our profession and who we are. And so for me, the most simplified a definition of hope is this idea that there's a will and a way, a belief that things can get better and also a game plan to get us there. And so I think that a lot of libraries that we might work at, there's a good belief that we want to do things better, but then there's no game plan to make it happen. And so a belief without a game plan is toxic positivity. And so we're going to need both in order to make it be the future we want to create. Again, a belief and a game plan. We can't have them separated. They need to be together. And I think that when we're also thinking about hope, we're also going to have to acknowledge that it's an uneven path. And it's all right to be upset with an unjust world. COVID happened. Things happened. And so it's all right to be upset over what might have happened last year or even 10 years ago. I think for a lot of us, it's also going to have to be about us prioritizing our physical, emotional, and financial health. I know as library professionals, we're always, the stereotype is that we're always giving and we're always helping, but we also need to prioritize ourselves. We're also going to have to acknowledge that some systems advantage some identities and disadvantage others. And that the problems that we're facing are systemic, meaning that they're really complex and interconnected. And it's really hard to give advice because every library is unique with its own challenges and opportunities. And I think for me, leadership or change is going to happen at every level. So at an individual level, we're going to have to gain an awareness of our own circumstances. At a departmental level, we're going to have to hold each other accountable. We're going to have to encourage people to take their vacation and their sick days. At an organizational level, we're going to have to look at things such as pay inequality or pay compression, helping out in the community. At an institutional level, so on our college campus, that's the bigger, larger university. At a local library, it might be the bigger municipality. Really looking at those types of things that are impacting the community and how we can solve them. And then at a societal level, we're going to have to really think about all these issues just for everyone. And so it's only by changing things at all these levels, all at once, are we able to make change. Because if we change anything at one level and we don't change it anywhere else, it won't make effective change. And so for some of the solutions, we can't create change without focusing on core essentials such as trust, communication, and safety. And so I think for me, when I think about this idea of loneliness, we're also going to have to work on these fundamentals. And oftentimes, change might look like it's, we're thinking about change, whether or not it's performative or meaningful. And so for me, when I think that if change is going to take 5 to 7 years, it's going to look very performative because it's just on a longer timeline. So it isn't that things aren't moving, it's just moving at a slower pace than most of us would like for it to happen. Mainly because the things that we want to change are big and interrelated, and they're very complex. And so if change takes so long, it means leaders will have to prioritize care as both a long-term and short-term solution, along with capacity building. We're going to have to start caring for people in a way that we've never cared before. And I think for a lot of people, it brings up this question of how long are you willing to wait? If you know that change is going to take 5 to 7 years, then how long do you want to wait in the situation? And I think for managers, again, they're often stuck between this middle line between frontline workers and upper level administration. And they're really questioning when do they have the power and when can they push back against unreasonable requests. They're often thinking about how do they create a learning organization. And learning can be really hard when individuals have been so harmed that it's really hard to be present. I think a lot of us, you might have burned out during COVID. And so it's really hard to give that 110% or even 100%. And so how do we be our best and kind of push the organization forward? I think for a lot of managers, they want to treat the whole person, but there's systems and policies set up for only them to focus on tasks. So they might want to recommend, hey, maybe you should talk about your feelings. Maybe you should go do the EAP. But it's really hard for them to really bring up that mental health conversation for people. And I think it's really this question of what does it mean to bring your whole self to work? How can we all be authentic in our workplaces? So for me, it brings up 5 tough questions when I think about this idea of loneliness and the workplace. And they are, is library work giving me energy? Am I compensated fairly? Is the library good for my mental health? Am I being nurtured and developed? Do I look forward to my daily work? And so the message I want to leave with you is everyone can make a difference. We each have the capacity to bring awareness to this issue. And so with the email that you'll get, you'll also get a copy of the slides. And I invite you to take them and share them with what you learned today with a friend. I also created a music playlist, and I'll put the link here in the chat. And so I really wanted to focus on some songs to really think about loneliness. And I realized that when I was putting together this playlist that I probably focused a lot on the sadness and maybe not so much the happiness. So definitely, if you have any songs that are much happier, definitely send me a link and I'll add more songs in. But sometimes it's great to have that connection through music to really let us think about our work lives. And so I'll take some questions if you want to put them in the Q&A.
Thank you, Alejandro. I saw a lot of questions in the chat box that this was really resonating with people. So, yeah, we do have about 5 minutes or so for questions. So if you want to go ahead and put those in the chat box, we will get those read off to Alejandro. I had to say I had a particular moment of connection when you were talking about interviewing for a job in the paper clips. I interviewed for a job once and was talking about my professional commitments, ALA and other committees and stuff. And someone said to me, "I don't know when you'll have time for that. We plan to work you to death." And I think that they were joking, but it wasn't very funny. um,
I love that, joking but true.
Yeah, right. This was so, and honestly, this was probably 15 years ago at this point, and I still remember it like very, very clearly. Um, so yeah, that's definitely out there. I really also appreciated the quotes that you shared on your slides from people who are experiencing different aspects of loneliness. Is that from a study that you did, or?
Those were all me.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. And we do have some questions, so I will go ahead and start this. I would be curious to know where the 5 to 7 years for change number came from, and what steps might occur in those years.
I think for me, I think that's more of a personal number that I came up with. I don't think that there is a real number, but I think with the challenges that we're facing, whether it be pay inequality or EDI issues or a negative work environment, we can think about our own personal lives and think about how long it takes for things to change. And so the number someone once told me was about 5 to 7 years. And I think that fits well with most complex issues. Things that are much easier, much sooner, but again, a very complex issue about 5 to 7 years. And I think the steps are that you're going to have to create an awareness of the issue and then start talking about it. And I think that's really hard for people because they want to take action. But again, without having fundamentals built in, without having that trust, that psychological safety, it's really hard to move the needle to change things without doing some of those fundamentals.
I don't know if you have an answer to this. How do we manage fear of retaliation against radical vulnerability when trying to change toxic environments?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. So when I think about this question, I'm thinking about this idea of cycles of silence. And so what happens in organizations, and a lot of organizations, even good organizations, we don't talk about the issue. And so by not talking about the issue, we make it seem like it doesn't exist, or it's not here, or it's not present. And so therefore, we give this impression to everybody that, what's happening is kind of, you're kind of imagining it happening. And so I think that organizations should talk about these things, even though they're difficult. And I think it's difficult because as a boss, as a manager, you want to keep the conversation positive and focus in a great direction. But again, I think without talking about the negative, you can't craft a good game plan to make it happen.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for titles addressing this topic? I assume that's book titles.
Oh, book titles. I want to say the title of the book that I read was Project Unlonely. I think it's in the reference section. When you get the slides, you'll be able to see it. Really great book. Really talks about the loneliness epidemic in our culture.
Great. I'm just trying to scroll real quick to see if it's in there, but I didn't get there fast enough. Another question. This sounds very much through the lens of trauma-informed librarianship. From your research, are more libraries utilizing this?
I think that a lot of libraries and library individuals are using a lot more trauma-informed librarianship within their practice. I think that for a lot of places, and this is just my own personal opinion, that there is this desire to do better and wanting to do better, but there's also seems like there's a disconnect somewhere along the process when we're doing this work. And so for me, when I think about these issues, it's not only about trauma-informed librarianship, but it's all the other ancillary issues built in, whether it be pay inequality or EDI issues. And so it's only by tackling like this whole broad sense of issues that we're able to create effective change.
Thank you. I just want to remind that we will share out the slides in an email after the presentation, but I also will gather any links from the chat and share them out. So I know there are several people who have dropped links in there, and so we'll grab those and share those out as well. I see a couple of book recommendations. I will also try to grab those and share them out as well. All right. I think this is going to have to be our last question. Do you have any resources to help the spiritual / existential loneliness? I'm told by the board, etc., that I'm doing brilliantly, but it doesn't feel like real support. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, I think that one's a really hard one because it's so different for every person when they're thinking about their own kind of meaningful work out there. I don't know if I have a recommendation personally. I think it's something that's great to sit with and also kind of think about. And if you have a good recommendation, I'd love to have, you can always send me an email and I'll put it in the references.
Great, thank you. All right, I am going to share my screen again. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. The evaluation link is coming soon. We don't have our CE code from MLA, so it's going to take us a little bit to get that out. So do keep a lookout for that. We do, again, are asking you for your feedback. Even if you don't want to claim CE, please take a few minutes to fill out that evaluation when it does come out. I want to thank Alejandro for being here today. We really appreciate his time and his sharing his research and information with us. And thank you to all of you for your time and attention for attending today's session. We will encourage you to follow us on our, of course, social media and other places to continue connecting with us and to find out about future training. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here today. We will send out an email with that information probably by the end of the week, so you can look for that in your mailboxes. And I am going to end the webinar. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.